Alcohol, booze, spirits, a glass of whiskey at a family gathering, or a round of beers with friends at the bar. However you phrase it, drinking is deeply woven into human culture. For centuries, people have turned to it in moments of celebration, sorrow, and relaxation. It can feel harmless, even essential to social life, but beneath the laughter and clinking glasses, something far more complicated is happening. What does alcohol really do inside the body when we indulge? And what toll does it take not just tonight, but in the years ahead? To answer that, let's follow two very different lives that mirror each other more than they realize. One is a college student named Jake, full of energy, hungry for experiences, swept up in the vibrant chaos of youth. The other is David, a middle-aged man whose story is carved from decades of using alcohol as both an escape and a companion. Their paths reveal two faces of drinking: the immediate, short-term chaos of heavy intoxication, and the slow, creeping damage of long-term reliance. Jake is in his late teens, eager to wring every ounce of excitement out of his university years. Friday night arrives, and for him that means loud music, crowded rooms, and a steady stream of shots passed around by his friends. As the evening begins, the mood is light. He laughs easily, greets everyone with confidence, and the alcohol fuels a sense of belonging that feels electric. Yet as each drink flows into his system, something shifts. The first part of his brain to falter is the region responsible for judgment and decision-making. Alcohol dulls the prefrontal cortex, the very center that keeps impulses in check. Normally, Jake would weigh risks, think about consequences, and recognize danger. But after several drinks, those instincts fade. Suddenly, dares that once seemed reckless become tempting, and ideas that would have been dismissed as foolish now appear thrilling. He finds himself climbing onto the dance floor with wild abandon, accepting games and challenges that push boundaries. In his mind, he feels bolder, freer, invincible even. But science tells a different story. Alcohol doesn't just relax the body, it strips away the careful filters that keep us safe. Studies consistently show that intoxicated people are far more likely to engage in risky actions, whether that means unsafe driving, confrontations, or physical stunts. Jake is no exception. To his friends, his behavior is both amusing and concerning. They can see he's becoming someone slightly different, a version of himself less cautious, more erratic, and harder to reason with. This is the social ripple of drinking. One person's impaired judgment can influence an entire group dynamic, sparking a chain reaction of poor choices. As the night deepens, another layer of impairment takes hold. Jake's movements become heavy, his coordination falters. The cerebellum, the part of the brain that fine-tunes balance and motor control, is dulled by the alcohol soaking through his system. Walking across a crowded room suddenly becomes a challenge. He bumps into people, stumbles into furniture, and nearly topples over when attempting something as simple as climbing a short set of stairs. Still, alcohol fuels him with a misplaced confidence. On the dance floor, he believes his rhythm is smooth, yet to onlookers his steps are clumsy and disjointed. This is the cruel irony. Alcohol inflates our sense of ability at the very moment it strips it away. By the time Jake decides to hop up onto a table, the gap between how capable he feels and how impaired he truly is has widened dangerously. One slip later, he crashes down, jolting both himself and those around him. Luckily, the injuries are minor. But his fall is more than a bruise to the body. It is a vivid snapshot of how intoxication multiplies risks. Emergency rooms across the world are filled with similar stories. Young people who overestimated their strength and underestimated the dulling fog of alcohol. Hours pass, and the effects continue layering. Jake's speech begins to slur, his sentences collapsing into fragments. Forming clear words becomes a battle. The central nervous system, slowed by alcohol, scrambles the brain's ability to coordinate speech and thought. Conversations that were once effortless now leave him confused, forgetting the rules of a drinking game or failing to follow a story. The fog spreads into his memory too. By the time the party winds down, his mind is already failing to capture what happened. The next morning, he will wake to discover blank spaces in his memory, an alcohol blackout. The body had been awake, moving, talking, even laughing, but the brain was too flooded to lay down long-term memories. Those missing hours are not just embarrassing, they are proof that alcohol reached toxic levels in his bloodstream. The physical punishment doesn't end when the party does. By sunrise, Jake's head throbs with pain. His mouth is desert dry, his stomach churning with nausea. Despite spending hours unconscious, he feels exhausted, as though he hadn't slept at all. This is the hangover. Dehydration, stomach irritation, and disrupted sleep cycles colliding to create a storm of discomfort. His pounding headache stems from blood vessels that expanded under alcohol's influence, while his exhaustion is fueled by the way alcohol fragments deep sleep cycles, robbing him of genuine rest. The vomiting he endured during the night wasn't just unpleasant. It was the body's desperate attempt to rid itself of poison. Scientists call it alcohol poisoning when the system is overwhelmed, and the vomiting is one of the clearest warnings the body can give. For Jake, the day after is miserable. He drags himself out of bed only to collapse again, his body demanding hydration, nutrients, and time. Reflecting on the night, he feels a mix of embarrassment and unease. What seemed like harmless fun nearly ended in serious injury. The foggy memories, the bruises, the exhaustion, they all paint a picture of how swiftly alcohol can flip from enhancer of fun to source of danger. His story mirrors countless others in dorms and campuses everywhere. Reminders that youth doesn't grant immunity from the risks of heavy drinking. David's story begins on a quiet morning that looks like any other. He wakes before sunrise out of habit, not because he slept well, but because his body has learned to drift in and out of shallow rest. The night before, he promised himself he would keep it light, just a drink or two to smooth the edges of the day. Promises like that are easy to make and harder to keep. Over time, the boundary between taking the edge off and needing a steady companion blurred. What once felt like a choice now feels like momentum, a slow slide that is difficult to stop. He is not reckless like Jake on a dance floor. His danger arrives in small daily increments that quietly add up. The first changes came years ago and arrived so softly he barely noticed. He felt more tired after meals, a bit of pressure under the ribs on the right side, a dull ache that faded if he sat perfectly still. He brushed off stomach discomfort as stress, headaches as dehydration, and restless sleep as part of getting older. He told himself he was functioning. He went to work, paid bills, showed up for family, and kept his world running. But inside, his liver had begun storing fat it could not clear. A fatty liver rarely announces itself with dramatic symptoms. It whispers. It asks for reconsideration. When that whisper is ignored, inflammation can follow. And what was once a reversible change starts carving grooves in the body that are hard to sand smooth. Months became years, and the occasional ache turned into days when food sat heavy and bitter. Mornings brought a sour taste and a tightness across the abdomen that no stretch could ease. His skin sometimes took on a faint yellow cast that only he seemed to notice, a subtle shift he suspected but did not want to confirm. He told himself he would cut back after the next holiday, after the next big project, after this tough season ended. Life, however, rarely sends a perfect pause. While he waited for a better time, his liver labored through a storm of toxins and inflammation. tirelessly trying to repair itself between nightly assaults. The day his doctor ordered imaging, the room felt colder than usual. The clinician spoke calmly, not unkindly, and explained that scar tissue had begun to replace healthy cells. Scar tissue does not filter the blood or regulate chemicals or manage energy the way healthy liver tissue does. It sits there, fibrous and stiff, interrupting flow. The word cirrhosis was not shouted. It was laid on the table like a heavy stone, one that would not move simply because he willed it to. In that moment, the years of small bargains made sense. He had not chosen calamity in a single night. He had chosen it by inches. His heart had a story to tell as well. The numbers on the blood pressure cuff crept higher, visit after visit, rising slowly enough that each increase felt explainable. A hard week, too much salt, not enough exercise. But alcohol has a way of raising pressure and keeping it there, making the heart work harder than it should to push blood through vessels that have lost their flexibility. Some evenings, his chest fluttered in a way that felt like a bird trapped behind his sternum. That irregular thumping often passed in minutes, but left behind a hollow fatigue that lasted hours. A clinician would later call it an arrhythmia and explain how alcohol can disrupt the heart's electrical rhythm. When the pump beats out of step and the muscle weakens over time, ordinary tasks begin to feel like uphill climbs. Stairs ask for more breath. Groceries feel heavier than they should. The body quietly shows the bill. His stomach and intestines joined the chorus. What used to be a hearty appetite became a wary negotiation. He learned which foods set off a fire in his gut and which could be tolerated. There were evenings of burning pain and other nights of a deep, gnawing ache that felt like hunger but was not relieved by eating. Alcohol strips away the protective lining of the stomach and erodes confidence in the delicate choreography of digestion. Inflammation flares, ulcers form, and bleeding is not a dramatic cinematic event, but a slow drip that steals iron and energy. On the worst days, pain radiated to his back and left him doubled over, the shadow of an angry pancreas making its presence known. He told himself it would pass. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it did not. Memory began to play tricks. Names he always knew waited just out of reach. He would walk into a room and stand still, unable to recall why he had gone there. Multi-step tasks demanded more effort and more lists. He wondered if he was simply busy, distracted, stretched thin by obligations. He wanted that to be true. But alcohol can shrink and damage brain tissue, not just in sensational news headlines, but quietly, gradually, in ordinary people who sit down each evening with a dependable glass that becomes a dependable bottle. Decision-making grows fuzzier. Focus splinters. It becomes easier to misplace entire afternoons, not in dramatic blackouts, but in a haze of lowered attention and diminished drive. Sleep, once a refuge, turned slippery. A nightcap seemed to pull him toward drowsiness, but the rest it delivered was shallow and broken. He woke often, heart thudding, mouth dry, sheets damp from sweat. By sunrise, he had technically been in bed for enough hours, yet he carried the heavy fatigue of someone who had not truly slept. The day demanded clear thinking. The night unraveled it. Mood followed sleep down. Grey days stretched into grey weeks. Alcohol is a depressant dressed as a friend, and it can deepen sadness even as it promises relief. The more he relied on it to soften the edges of worry and loneliness, the more it sharpened them underneath, leaving him with fewer resources to face them sober. Social life changed in ways that were difficult to admit. At first, he simply preferred gatherings where drinks were certain. Then he avoided invitations that might ask him to be fully present. He cut back on hobbies that once filled him with ease because they conflicted with the routine he had built around evening pours. Isolation is not always a dramatic retreat. Sometimes it is a slow narrowing of choices until the house, the couch, and the familiar glass feel like the only spaces that do not demand explanations. Relationships frayed in small ways. Promises were postponed. calls were returned late. The people who loved him worried and were not always sure how to help without making him feel cornered. The turning point arrived without trumpet or catastrophe. It came in a doctor's office with lab results that did not blink and a conversation that was both compassionate and firm. The clinician explained that the body has a remarkable ability to heal when given the chance. But that chance has a window. Some damage is reversible, some is not. Slowing down the harm and reclaiming health would require more than good intentions. It would require structure, honesty, and support. They discussed hydration, nutrition, movement, and regular monitoring. They talked about the delicate work of rewiring rituals, about finding different ways to mark the end of a day, about practicing calm without chemical shortcuts. He did not transform overnight. Change rarely looks like a cinematic montage. It looked like choosing tea instead of whiskey on a weeknight and tolerating the restlessness that followed. It looked like replacing the first drink with a walk around the block and discovering that fresh air did not fix everything but helped enough to matter. It looked like reaching out to a counselor and sitting in a chair across from someone whose job was not to judge him, but to help him untangle the knots he had tied in his own life. It looked like telling a trusted friend the truth and asking for company during evenings that felt longest. Support groups entered the picture too, rooms where strangers spoke in a language he recognized, where honesty felt like oxygen and progress was measured in ordinary days, strung together without a drink. As the months opened, his body offered small thank yous. The morning ache under his ribs softened. His skin regained a warmer tone. Sleep deepened slowly, then steadier. The bird in his chest flapped less often. Stairs still asked for breath, but they no longer demanded tribute. Clarity came back in fits and starts, and with it a quiet pride, the kind that does not announce itself, but is felt in the way he stood at the sink, washing dishes after dinner, present and unhurried. He learned to respect the line between what could heal and what could not, to hold gratitude for improvements without pretending the past had no cost. He also learned that sobriety is not simply the absence of alcohol, it is the presence of alternatives. He tried new routines and kept the ones that worked. He showed up to medical appointments and listened. He forgave himself for imperfect days and recommitted the next morning. He began to see alcohol not as a villain lurking in a bottle, but as a substance that his particular life and wiring could not carry without harm. That clarity freed him from self-blame and replaced it with responsibility. David's path does not erase the years behind him, just as Jake's bruises do not erase the danger of another reckless night. Yet both stories reveal the same truth from different angles. Alcohol can tip a lively evening into chaos in a matter of hours, and it can reshape a life in slow motion over the span of years. The body keeps score in both cases. One tale is a fall from a table and a morning of nausea. The other is a medical chart marking scar tissue and a calendar filled with quiet choices. Neither story is about shame. Both are about understanding what is really happening beneath the surface and deciding, with open eyes, what comes next. There is another layer to this story that often goes unspoken because it does not crash through a door the way a fall from a table does. It builds quietly, cell by cell, year by year. Alcohol does not only strain the organs you can feel, it can also change the very instructions that tell your cells how to behave. When alcohol is broken down, it produces a highly reactive byproduct that can damage DNA and interfere with repair processes. Over time, that disruption can raise the likelihood of certain cancers. The liver is an obvious place to start because it handles the heavy lifting of detoxifying the blood, and long seasons of irritation and scarring can set the stage for malignant change. The tube that carries food to the stomach is also vulnerable, especially when drinking is paired with smoking, a combination that magnifies harm. The large intestine can be affected as well, where inflammation, shifts in gut chemistry, and changes in nutrient metabolism may tip risk upward. Even tissues influenced by hormones like the breast can be affected because alcohol can nudge hormone levels in ways that are not benign. These are not scare tactics. They are the body's plain arithmetic. Dose and duration matter. Genetics and overall health matter. But the trend line is clear enough to deserve attention. None of this means a person is powerless. Knowledge is not a verdict. It is a map. Whether someone sees themselves in Jake's weekend misadventures or in David's long, slow accumulation of consequences, the path forward begins in the same place, noticing what is true and choosing one small, sustainable change at a time. For many people, the most practical shift is pace. Sipping rather than tossing back a drink gives the liver time to do its work and gives the mind a moment to listen to the signals coming from the body. Alternating with water is not a party foul. It is a simple way to protect the brain and stave off the dehydration that turns a pleasant evening into a punishing morning. Food matters too. Protein, fiber, and healthy fats before or during an event slow absorption and blunt extremes. Clarity also grows when the vague idea of cutting back becomes something concrete. Some people decide on a personal ceiling for a night out and stick to it. Others set alcohol-free days each week to rebuild a sense of normal that is not anchored to a glass. Swapping in lower strength options or exploring the expanding world of alcohol-free beers, wines, and spirits can scratch the social itch without the neurological tax. The point is not to perform discipline. It is to design an environment where the easier choice happens, to be the wiser one. That can be as simple as stocking the fridge differently, or choosing venues where a thoughtful, non-alcoholic menu exists. Tracking helps more than most people expect. Writing down what and when you drink for a stretch of days replaces guesswork with a picture that is hard to ignore. Patterns emerge. Triggers reveal themselves. Maybe stress after work is the fuse. Maybe loneliness on weekend nights is the quiet driver. When the pattern is visible, you can place alternatives exactly where they are needed. A brisk walk at dusk, a call to a friend. A creative hobby that takes both hands and most of your attention. Rituals are powerful, so build new ones. A favorite mug of tea can signal, "Day is done," just as convincingly as a pour ever did. If restlessness follows, breathe through it. Most urges crest and fall like a wave if you do not feed them. Social pressure is real, but it can be disarmed with a simple sentence prepared in advance. "I am pacing myself tonight," or "I am good with this one," ends more conversations than it starts. In groups where you feel you must explain yourself, consider what that says about the group, not about you. People who care about you will care about your goals. If you thrive on accountability, tell a trusted person what you are trying to do and ask them to check in. If you are the person who sets the tone in your circles, imagine the permission you offer others when you order something alcohol-free without apology. Culture is just a set of repeated choices. Yours can be the pebble that starts a different ripple. Sometimes the kinder move is not moderation, but a pause long enough for the body and brain to reset. If that thought feels daunting, support exists in many forms. A primary care clinician can order labs, monitor blood pressure and liver markers, and talk through options that include counseling and, when appropriate, medications that reduce cravings or make drinking less rewarding. Therapists can help you understand why a drink at sunset feels like survival and how to build gentler ways to regulate emotion. Peer groups offer something professionals cannot: the steady relief of being understood by people who have sat where you are sitting. There is no single correct door to walk through. Choose the one you will actually use. Safety still matters in the meantime. If you plan to drink, plan the ride before the first glass, not after the fourth. Keep alcohol away from medications that interact dangerously. Do not drink to chase sleep. It will cheat you of the deep rest you need. If you ever experience warning signs like vomiting blood, black stools, crushing chest pain, or confusion so profound you cannot account for hours, those are emergency signals, not inconveniences. Your life is worth the trip to urgent care or the call for help. For those already on the path of change, progress often shows up in subtle moments that would be easy to overlook if you were only watching the scale or waiting for lab numbers to improve. It is the afternoon when your mind feels clear enough to finish a task in one sitting. It is the morning you notice your face looks a little less puffy. It is a laugh that feels unforced, and a conversation you remember the next day in crisp detail. It is the return of honest hunger, steady energy, and sleep that knits the day back together. Celebrate those without turning them into pressure. Consistency beats intensity here. A string of ordinary evenings done well can move mountains. Imagine Jake a few semesters from now. The memory of that night still pinches, but it also guides him. He heads to a party with a simple plan he keeps. He drinks slowly, switches to water, dances without climbing anything that isn't a staircase with a handrail, and goes home with memories intact. He wakes with a clear head for his morning run. The point is not that he became saintly. He learned his own edges and chose not to tumble over them. That is maturity disguised as restraint. Imagine David a few seasons further into his recovery. The calendar on his kitchen wall has appointments and ordinary errands written in neat lines. His doctor's notes show stabilized numbers. He still attends a group when he needs reinforcement and sees a counselor who helps him keep his footing. Some mornings he walks a familiar loop around the neighborhood, noticing small changes in the trees and the light, proof that time passes and bodies adapt when given half a chance. He does not pretend the past did not happen, and he does not let it write the ending for him. Each evening he makes the tea that once felt like a weak substitute and now feels like a friend. Both stories remind us that alcohol's effects stretch across a spectrum. Quick, loud consequences at one end, and quiet, cumulative ones at the other. The common thread is agency. You can choose how you engage with a substance that culture often treats like the default. You can decide to slow down, to stop, to circle back after a slip, to ask for help, to protect your future self from harm you can avoid. You can build a life where connection and calm are possible without pouring anything into a glass. The body you live in is always listening. When you treat it with respect, it answers back with strength, clarity, and time.